Well, I think you'll agree this is an extraordinary group of films this year. I welcome you to this event, which has become an annual rite of celebration for the Directors Guild. And I think what we've come to do is, by way of tradition here, is kind of discuss these films in terms of breaking them down into the prep and production and post-production period. And we'll do that tonight. And we're also going to try a couple of new things tonight, because why not? If we're not innovators, we're not trying. And so we do want to talk about that. But I always like to start this discussion. Directors, it's been said many times, what's the job? Well, it's making decisions. It basically comes down to making decisions. And I think often the most important decision we make is why do I want to do this project in the first place? What is this something I want to take on? Is this going to be okay for the next year of my life? Or in some cases longer. And so I want each of you guys to try to answer that question for us. Give us an insight into why you said yes. And I'd like to start with Jay because he's the veteran of these wars. So Jay, why all the way? Because I mean, there's no. We all know that there's absolutely no drama or conflict or emotion in politics.
How much time do I have? I'm obsessed with these stories. I'm particularly obsessed with how then shall our civilization progress? You know, how miraculous is it that we find ways to get along and have a political structure that we actually vote for and authorize in a way as the people, and yet it's set up in a certain way to be functional to some degree and does function to some degree, but when it's dysfunctional, it's really interesting. And so most of the stories I'm working on these days for whatever reason are about what is the predicament of being a leader and a member of a kind of organization that's trying to do good things for good people as or for all people as a structure and an institution and a culture, and what are the issues about that? So it just turned out on this particular one that I got to see this amazing play. I'd worked with Brian on Trumbo, and I went to see the play on Broadway, and I was like, wow, this is a ready-made predicament, you know, and already all worked out as a play. Our challenge will be to turn it into a film and make it cinematic. But I always look at what's the predicament that the characters find themselves. Why are they uniquely the right characters to be in that predicament, and how are they also in a way ill-equipped for the predicament? And LBJ was such a unlikely. He wanted to be president his whole life, but he gets it in such an unlikely way when JFK is assassinated, and he's surrounded by his own sort of character assassins, and that all the Kennedy people hated him. He wasn't expected to do anything great, and he should have probably just played it safe, and instead he takes on the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 as his very first. His transition, you know, we're in a place of transition presidential politics right now, and when you compare the transitions that are you know, from that era to what's going on now, it just seemed really incredibly compelling, and yeah, that made it easy to jump in.
Did Brian ask you to jump in?
A combination of people, actually. I had worked with Steven Spielberg on some, you know, a couple comedies, Meet the Parents, you know, years before, when he was going to direct Meet the Parents. When I took it on, and he was going to, for a very short time, was thinking of directing this one. So I just keep getting Spielberg hand-me-downs, you know. And he actually asked me, and I had history with HBO, but he brought it to HBO, and I think it was actually Steven who first brought up let's get Jay to do it. And then Brian heard about it and was really happy about that possibility. But I said yes to doing All the Way before we'd even started Trumbo. So I was like, oh, I hope Trumbo goes well, because otherwise I'm in a real pickle.
Raymond, same question. Why Madoff? Why now? Why'd you do it?
Well, it was a very fortuitous moment because I wanted to move into television, and I'd been developing a series of my own, and I pitched something to ABC that I wanted to do as a miniseries, and they almost did it. They didn't do it, but at that juncture, at that critical juncture, one of the executives said to me, "Would you be interested in directing something that you didn't write or you didn't create?" And I said, if I thought it was something that I could bring something to, and they said, "Well, we're going to do Madoff." And I had been fascinated with Madoff from the minute the whole thing broke. I'm a New Yorker. I knew a lot of the kind of the world that was involved with it. But the thing that I was always interested in about Madoff, it wasn't the ghoulishness of the crime. It was that his whole family was involved. And I always thought there's something so weird about the fact, and I always thought it had to do with why everyone said, like, why didn't he kill himself? Why didn't he jump off the roof? And I was like, because his sons were in there and his wife was there. And the question was always, what did they all know? And so when ABC gave me the scripts to read, I realized, like, well, that's what they focused on. It wasn't so much the crime. It was like, how were they all involved and what did they know? And they refreshingly did not try to nail it down. And so I thought that was really, that was up my alley too, because my other movies, my independent films, have usually been family-centric and involved with the dynamics of families. So I thought maybe I can bring something to this. It's also a big true crime story, and I love them. And my very first film was a true crime story, but it wasn't something I was known for. So I thought, this is they're going to take a chance on me doing it because they think that I can bring something to it beyond maybe what everyone thinks is the sensational side of it. And that was great because, like, when we got started with it, a lot of the questions were, and when I got, and Richard Dreyfuss and I started working together, it was, well, you can't humanize this man. But we realized, no, you have to. You have to find who he is. You have to find why this happened. It's not just a case of evil. The result of it is evil. But you're not able to meet Bernie. He's not available. They won't let you meet him. But we found that there was a reporter who worked for the New York Magazine, Steve Fisher, who he got in touch with. He found a way to get to Madoff at Butner, where he's incarcerated, through another inmate, and he got Bernie to call him. And there are these great phone conversations that are taped and they're available on the internet. And Richard and I listened to them, and you learned who Bernie was through them, and who he was the guy who you would meet at your friend's son's wedding in Long Island. He was a absolutely low-key, my mother would say Hamish, he was the accountant who you could trust. There was no flash, there was no dazzle, and he still has that in his delivery. And Richard and I thought, well, this is who he was, and this is how he got you. And in fact, it really was how he began. His tragedy began as a result of being able to, and of course, there were other reasons along the way, which I won't enumerate. Watch the movie if you haven't. So it humanized him, and having Dreyfuss, I mean, you have this great actor who's perfect for the part, and we were able to find a way to go, yes, let's do this because it's going to, whether you like it or not, we're going to put a human face on what appears to be an inhuman character, and there's no reason to make the movie otherwise, in my opinion. So that's what got me into it.
Now, Alex, you came. We're interested in knowing how this came into your life. You are a little bit different than the other three nominees tonight in that your credit on these two wonderful productions, Grease Live and Hairspray Live, is as live television director or directed by, and then the wonderful Kenny Leon, who did Hairspray, is the directed by credit.
Correct.
And Thomas Kail is directed by on Grease.
Indeed.
Now, tell us how this came into your life, why you wanted to do it, and give us a little, for those of us who work strictly in film or in a, for lack of a better word, a more traditional manner, tell us how those two functions break down on this type of show.
It's a total synergy, and it has to be to work effectively. The reason why, when let's take a step back and let's look at what NBC did with The Sound of Music when I think it's 4 years ago now. They kind of reinvented a genre that had been around maybe a decade or more, but it hadn't really been the live musical event hadn't been on our TV screens for a while. And I think one of the challenges of doing what is ostentatiously a live movie and bringing it to screen is that in real time, it's really too much work to be able to technically direct the logistical process of that and to be able to direct your cast at the same time. So the role was kind of split into two. And so both for Tommy Kell and Kenny and the other stage directors who've done the other musicals, the way that the synergy is broken down between live television director and director is that the director generally concentrates on the casting, working with that cast, doing initial blocking, and helping to mold the universe of the story and working obviously with the script. And the live television director is coming in terms of, from my role, how do I execute that? How do I tell the story as best as possible in real time? How do I try and give the director, the staging director, as it were, everything that they want and they ideally aspire to be able to tell that story in the best way. But for me, I have to think about how to do it in real time. I have one take at it. It has to be as perfect as possible.
One 3-hour take.
1 3-hour take. So that synergy between a director and live broadcast director starts from a very early point. It's about a 9-month process for both for Hairspray and for Grease. For Grease, which obviously came along first, I think the first call I got was from both Paramount and Mark Platt, kind of at the same time, talking about the fact that they had this incredible access to the book for Grease. They wanted to do a live remake of the show, and this was the first time Fox had gone into this genre. Up until that point, it had just been NBC. And again, huge kudos to NBC for reinventing that. But I think one of the things, getting together with Mark and with Paramount, one of the things we talked about was like, how can we take this on? It's been an incredibly successful brand. It's been a holiday fair, which has done very well ratings-wise for a couple of years. We now have a format and a story that really everyone in America, if not everyone, many people around the world know very well and very dearly, and a lot of people have grown up with this wonderful story of Grease. And so, how do we do that justice? How do we not try and duplicate the incredible casting that was in the original movie, but how do we try and take it on and own it and be our own entity? And I think one of the things that we all agreed on, and the first time I met Tommy, we both came in with the same creative in terms of we wanted to open the format up and make it, the fact that we have live, those 4 letters at the end of the name, it's not just Grease, it's Grease Live. Grease Live, right. We really felt that we were missing a beat if we didn't try and say to the audience, wow, this really is happening in real time. Mm-hmm. You know, that not a criticism, but we felt that the format needed to evolve so that as an audience member at home watching this event, you didn't just feel that you were in the front row of a super quiet proscenium theater watching an event. We felt that we wanted people to be immersed in the environment and it was happening all around them. So one of the things we talked about was bringing a live audience in, which obviously people an audience is comfortable hearing an audience, but perhaps not in the dramatic genre. So we were trying to meld these multiple different genres together, and we felt that by having a live audience, it would bring energy to the brand. And it would help to celebrate the kind of the dynamicness and the kineticness of what is basically a high energy, kind of slightly schmaltzy musical, but would help just augment what we were trying to do. And I think, that was a hugely bold move. I think it paid off for us. I think we learned a lot from doing it. There were times when perhaps the audience was a little bit of a distraction, but there was also times when it added hugely to the feeling that you were, as a viewer, celebrating in this event that was happening in real time.
And did it become Hairspray Live because of the success of that moniker with Grease?
No, it was Hairspray live from the get-go. They were all. I think all the musicals to date have had the live at the end amended soon. But in terms of did Hairspray copy what Grease had done and try and take it on the next step? Absolutely. And
Right.
and NBC were thrilled that the brand had taken a slightly different road, and that the live event, not only breaking the four walls of a proscenium soundstage, going outside, which was a huge deal, but also trying to have an audience in a way that helped augment the story, that wasn't distracting, and that's what we tried to do on Hairspray, which was, luckily one of the beats in Hairspray was that we had a live audience that it called for a TV show, the Corny Conan show, which naturally needed an audience. So we tried to integrate an audience in that way without just having screaming people for no reason on the edge of a set.
Well, we're going to have one of the things we're going to do a little bit different tonight that I think you'll find really interesting and informative is we're going to take a little break shortly and look at how Alex achieved some of his remarkable work, particularly with regard to Hairspray. In the meantime, Steve, I want to ask you the same question. And I know we were talking, and now Steve's situation is a little bit different in terms of the nominees up here, in that Steve is nominated for what is essentially the pilot of The Night Of, and it was, I think, subtitled The Beach, or that was the name of the episode. But you told me you directed all but 1 hour of the, what was it, nine hours? Yeah. How did it come into your life? What compelled you to want to do this?
I got a call from a producer named Jane Tranter, who sent me there was a mini-series made by the BBC called Criminal Justice. It was very good. And I said, basically, I'll do the pilot, do a pilot. and Richard Price, who wrote the pilot, said, I'll write a pilot. And that was it. And we had every intention of just doing that and walking away. Because if somebody had said how long it was really going to take, I don't think either of us would have done it. I'm really happy we did, but it was 7 years. And
overall in developing it.
Right, for the writing and directing and post, and a couple of delays in the middle of all of that. But what we were trying to do was to make really a 8 or 9 hour movie and make it like a movie. We didn't do anything for television. We didn't do anything different than we would have done if we were making a feature film.
You didn't consider act breaks at the end of each episode?
No.
Okay.
We had, in fact, the Beach, the first episode, it's almost an hour and a half now. It was written and shot to be an hour. But in the editing, I realized that we ended up with 9 hours, and instead of having 9 episodes, we made the first one and the last one longer. So we had that kind of freedom, and HBO said, "Yeah, do whatever you have to do," and it actually turned out good, because I think it was nice to have a longer first episode. But that actually represents 2/3 of that was shot in 2012, and the other third was shot in 2014. So we had a big break in between. And what were we doing during that break? We were writing scripts. And
so the break was between the pilot and the rest of it? Or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the 2 year. When I say 2 year break, 2 years of not filming, it was 2 years of writing, because I wasn't going to go, forward with directing anymore, and until we had all the scripts, and I didn't want to get into this whole. There's a crew prepping, and there's a crew shooting, and there's a crew editing. I really didn't want to do that.
If you had known that it was going to be all those years, would you have taken it on?
I don't think I would have, but I'm happy I did. And I think that a lot of times the things that you do in your life, you do because you don't know how you wise up at a certain point. But I didn't. I had no experience in television. And wanting to apply this sort of like feature film idea to doing this is why it ended up taking a long time. we had obviously we had a crew for the pilot, but once we started shooting the rest of the show, we had one crew that went for the whole thing. We had over a year in post, So if you divide it up that way, it's not so bad because we made basically 4 movies in 7 years. That's not bad.
No, that's a lot of directors would settle for that average. All right, let's talk a little bit about the craft of prepping for the films that you did. And I'd like to try something a little bit different this year. Prep is that maddening, infuriating period of time when it's all nothing is accomplished. It's all before you, and all you can do is just get more anxious about it. And what I thought we might do tonight is I looked at all of the films, and there were certain things about the prep look particularly challenging in your film. So just for the heck of it, let me throw an idea at each one of you and ask you about that part of the prep of your picture. Otherwise, we might be here all night, and some of us will want to get to the bar in the next 2 hours, 2 minutes. I'm not sure. Raymond, I was noticing, for example, in Madoff, one of the things that I was kind of knocked out by was how many true story happened in a real place, happened in and around Manhattan. To a degree, although we were talking. It's locations. You had locations in Manhattan. You had to deal with Long Island. You had to find places that at least doubled for Palm Springs, and on and on and on. And that's you had a lot to deal with. How did you go about? Were you guided by trying to match exactly where you knew it took place, or get as close as you could, or what was your process with your location manager?
The great thing about this, because it's the first time I've worked in television, and I got handed this great assignment that I wanted, and there had been talk before I was on about where else can you shoot it? Is it cheaper to go to and there were some funny ideas floating around about South Africa and and all of my movies have been shot in New York, and I said you can make great deals in New York. Don't be scared of New York, and I can crew up really fast because all of my movies have been done there, and I know all the places we can do it. So what we were really trying to do is we duplicated his office on a soundstage. ABC gave us their stage that used to be, I guess, was the All My Children stage that was just sitting dormant. So we built his office there. But aside from duplicating his office, it was trying to find the flavor. It was also working on a budget. It was not the highest budget that ABC's ever spent or Disney's ever spent on anything, but the really great thing, the irony of this is that in a sense, Bernie was sort of like an executive producer of the movie, because for years, as I've searched for locations, one of the things you always want to shoot are country clubs, and they don't want movie crews.
All right.
They don't want you around in spite of how sumptuous and interesting their locations are. But we started nosing around, and it turns out the policy is very different now. Country clubs will take a movie crew if you have to pay a moderately good, and it's because of Madoff. So much membership disappeared, and it literally was it was such a funny advantage for us to have. So we went, we were able to go to country clubs in Long Island and Westchester, and they all doubled or even sometimes tripled for So we would spend a day at at Ohika, which is a fabulous house in Long Island, and we would knock out, in a day or 2 days, 6 different things, and they doubled for a chateau in France, or an apartment, Peter Madoff's apartment on Park Avenue, or so we were accomplishing the film, but I think that maybe the best thing about this for me was that I was still essentially able to work the way I always have, which is I had my crew. I was in essence making an independent movie in my way, except for this great company that was giving me more money that I never had, and yet still we were approaching it from an independent point of view. How do we utilize New York? How do we utilize those crews? How do we utilize what you have as a filmmaker in New York, which is where I've always felt you have much more flexibility than most people think you do.
Mm-hmm. Steve, I wanted to ask you about casting. I thought you just had a knockout cast. And I know that I should use this. I know that, and I think most people know that James Gandolfini was this was talked about as being a favorite pet project of his, and then sadly James passed away before you could get any filming done, and then John Turturro took over the role and was brilliant. Was it difficult to get any actor, let alone John, to come into a project that had seemed to be earmarked for James?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know exactly what John went through in making his decision. I actually did shoot with James for one day. Again, the pilot, as I mentioned before, the first episode was meant to end when he first sees the kid in the jail cell, and he walks outside, he stops, he turns, he goes back in. That was the end of the first episode. So I shot all of that stuff with Jim in one day. So that's the only thing that we had to reshoot with John in terms of that. I mean, the casting, there's some very interesting actors in major roles in this, like Bill Camp and Jeannie Berlin, and some wonderful and
Bill Camp
Porna
being
Payman.
Detective Box,
correct, and Jeannie, who's the prosecutor, and Payman and Porna, the parents, and again, they're all movie people primarily, and but then there's 200 other parts. Speaking parts in the 9 hours, and that was how I spent my weekends, because you can't book these people in advance. You have to book them maybe a week or two in advance, because if you screw up and you miss your day or you have to put it off, you got to pay them, and they've gone off actually to do another job. So I would look at about 20 people for each part, and there were 200 parts, so I don't know what the math is. 4,000? I mean, pretty much all New York actors, and they're fantastic. I mean, there's such a wealth of great actors in New York.
Well, and they're so incredibly real in the roles, which is a great tribute to you and the work you did. You were telling me that Riz Ahmed was. How many actors did you look at before casting him?
I counted them up. It was 150.
This is Nazir Khan, the principal young.
Yeah, how actor. He eluded me for so long, I don't know, because he's probably the best known Pakistani actor. But he was busy. He was doing other things, and I didn't even hear about him. And I looked at, like I said, certainly over 100. I think it was close to 150. And I did screen tests of about the top 5. And I remember Michael Lombardo at HBO, watched these screen tests and said, do you see the character there? And I said, I can make any of these. These are very good actors. I can make any one of them work. And he said, that's not what I asked you. And he said, you shouldn't do it if you're not convinced. And it was really the best advice. It was like I did have to keep looking. And once I found Riz, I could answer that question honestly.
Well, it was extraordinary, just extraordinary. Really, and the casting director still loved you by the end.
Yeah. A.V. Kaufman, she still speaks to me.
Still take your calls. Jay, I want to ask you about production design and how you work with your production designer. I mean, All the Way, a play written by the great Robert Schenken. That was about 2014 that was in New York or so. Bryan Cranston, of course, was already making history with the role. I thought you did an incredible job of the old phrase, opening up the play. The film feels nothing like a play to me. You really did a wonderful job, but you faced some terrific, intimidating production design challenges. You've got to you got to figure out what the halls of Congress looked like in 1964. You've got to do the Oval Office. You've got the period LBJ Ranch. You've got the hospital that JFK died in. All of these things, and let alone you got to find that car that was the original jet ski and all of those. So how did you attack the problem of the production design?
Well, the great thing about doing historical things is is that you have good sound people who you don't have to make much up. You just have to do really good research. And then the next challenge is how can you, on the budgets, I mean, it wasn't a super tight HBO budget, but it became much tighter when I, having shot on location for years, my wife finally said, "Nope, you can't. I can't lose you this year." And I actually went to HBO and said, "You know what? I actually recommend you get somebody else because I have to shoot it here if we're going to do it. It's going to cost several million more dollars to do that, and I'm totally cool if you let it go." And they said they were not happy to hear that, but they said, "Let's just shoot it here." And so I insisted on shooting it here, and we quickly started figuring out where are the Oval Office standing sets and where are the LBJ Ranch was the kind of deal breaker. If I couldn't find something that was close to Johnson City outside of Austin, Texas, I thought we wouldn't be able to pull it off, and we might as well go to New Orleans or somewhere. We shot Trumbo in New Orleans, and but we found an amazing place out in near Thousand Oaks, and that became the ranch. And then we started, the biggest production design challenges probably were scaling down the House and the Senate enough to fit the budget but not look ridiculous. And so we just started cutting rows, and figuring out the geometry and how to turn the House and Senate are actually quite similarly shaped architecturally. They're different size, and so it was more logistical than it was creative. I mean, having worked on films where we were making everything up like in the Austin Powers movies or whatever, it was a different challenge. But Mark Ricker, who had done the production design on Trumbo, came with me and did the production design on this. And a lot of people were intimidated by both films. And when I interviewed designers for the budget, they just didn't think it was possible. And he just figured it out. It was amazing. That I wanted to say that the DP became very important in the way the film looked, though, and the way we decided to open it up. We had found this still photographer who was in the White House almost the entire time that LBJ was there, a Japanese guy who we portray in the film as he's kind of a background guy who's just always shooting everywhere. This guy, I think his name is Yoichi Okamoto. We just called him Oki, as the character. I think that was his nickname. And he always framed the White House in very pushed compositions that weren't about normal framing. It was just like the architecture became, the bigger part of the shot. So the peoples would sometimes be down the bottom left or right. It was just not typical. It was hyper composed, which was different from the other historical films we had done. And rather than just force some other stylistic thing, we just decided to go with it. I tried like crazy to make it a black and white film because I just was so enthralled by these period archival shots. I actually, almost like laid on the train tracks, as they say, with HBO, and said it just has to be black and white. We have this incredible footage from the conventions. We have all this stuff. It just has to be. And I, as soon as the train started being close to running me over, I said, okay, I'm getting off the tracks and we'll just do it in color. And we did do it in color, but I fought like crazy to get it to be black and white. But the look was very inspired by this one choice, which I think he'd inherited from JFK. This guy who smoked the pipe, and he was always there with his 50 millimeter lens and his 35 millimeter lens, and he never had any fancy gear. He was just always around shooting the White House.
Also, I wanted to ask you just a quick addendum about casting, even though we threw that bone to Steve, and this kind of applies to Raymond too. You're casting. You needing to cast actors who look like or feel like people that we know from public events.
That's something.
Did you pay much attention to? Was it important to you that Bradley Whitford looked like Hubert Humphrey?
I do think it's important for people that are iconic to some extent. And Humphrey, you could argue many people wouldn't care that much, but Bradley transformed himself. I mean, he hasn't done that many. He's such a great actor, and he's done so many interesting roles, but rarely gets to transform himself. So it was very exciting for him to do it. The roles that scared me, if we didn't get them right, to me, I mean, we had Brian, and he'd already transformed. On stage, he only had done his earlobes and glasses. You know, we went for a full prosthetic thing where we had little pieces here, a nose, somewhat better hair, and the earlobes. But the parts that scared me were Lady Bird and Martin Luther
Melissa
King.
Leo.
Martin Luther King, Selma had been such a favorite film of mine the year before, and it had been criticized to some extent by some people for
Anthony Mackie as Martin Luther King.
Underdoing LBJ. And so I knew we had to get a great MLK, and that really kept me up at night wondering who that was going to be. And Anthony was very reluctant at first, and because he'd been asked from many, he has a certain physical resemblance, and he'd been asked to play him before, and he was very, very reluctant to take on such a part. And the other weird thing was, I offered the part to Melissa Leo, and the same thing happened on the part that we ended up getting Frank Langella for, Dick Russell. And both of the actors that I offered said, "Oh, they're already being offered parts playing in the other LBJ film." And I said, "What other LBJ film?" And they said, "Oh, Rob Reiner's doing one with Woody Harrelson." And Melissa Leo was offered Lady Bird. And another actor that I'd offered, the Dick Russell, who actually ended up going on and doing that part, Richard Jenkins, I was competing with another film that nobody told me was happening. I was like, she's going to play Lady Bird in another film. So we ended up having to kind of wrestle to get
Funny,
Melissa Leo
HBO just neglected to mention that little...
Well, I don't know if anybody, any of us knew. So Woody had mentioned to me, because I knew him from having done Game Change with him, that he was up for that. And he said, "Are you guys doing that LBJ thing?" I said, "Yeah." And Brian's going to be amazing. He goes, "Oh, I don't want to take that on." Next thing I know, I can't get Melissa Leo because she's going and doing that film. But that film hasn't come out yet, and they had already kind of arranged for it to be out later. But it was just an interesting quirk of casting that I was competing. All the people who were the right people, the same casting. I mean, it wasn't the same casting, but Melissa Leo is so much like Lady Bird. Of course, she would be. Right. People would be fighting to get her in their other LBJ movie.
Raymond, did you and Richard talk about a physical resemblance to Bernie, or were you just trying to get the essence of the character?
Before I even answer, I had no idea that we shared this strange ghost movie thing. But
that's right. You guys.
There's an HBO Madoff movie that
the De Niro.
It was in development, I think, long before ABC decided to do this. I didn't know about it. I came into the movie, we started putting it together, and then we heard that HBO greenlit their Madoff movie, which hasn't aired yet. Right. So we were always kind of looking over our shoulder, like, what are they doing? Like, what's this movie? And what, but as a result of that, I mean, my feeling was like, just forget about it. Don't worry about it. They're going to make their De Niro movie, Madoff movie with De Niro. But Richard and I started talking early on about, well, are we doing Madoff? Are you interpreting him? My feeling was, you know what, you know him, but you don't know him like you know LBJ. You don't know him like you know Martin Luther King. And Richard is just he's just so him. It's like he's an actor who he's always going to dial up or dial down him, but he's him. He doesn't do something else. And he went through a short period in pre-production where he wanted to do tests, makeup tests, where they made him look like Bernie, and they were good tests. But I was never really thrilled with the idea because I just thought, well, Richard's charm and his excitement is it's Dreyfuss. It's this guy who, he can embody someone without being them. And I think it was really kind of a process he had to go through. He had to kind of make sure that he could rid himself of, having to be Bernie, but interpreting him. So that's what happened with him. Ruth was easier because most people don't know her except for her being running away from the cameras on Park and 64th. But Blythe, in a strange twist of events, Blythe Danner, somehow there was a connection within her family, or like she had a cousin who knew Ruth, and Ruth heard that Blythe was going to play her, and she said, Ruth said, would Blythe come and meet me? And this was it was peculiar because we heard it through this weird connection, and she said, we said, well, why does she want to meet her? And she said, I want her to know who I am. I want her to know that I'm not the most evil woman married to the most evil man. I'm a grandmother. And I don't know what you guys are doing and what your movie is, but I would appreciate it. So there was much talk with a lot of lawyers from Disney, and eventually there were a set of rules about, well, what can we say to her? But Blythe was wonderful. She took a train to Greenwich, Connecticut, and she spent the afternoon with Ruth. And I think that what she came away with, which I didn't really understand until we started shooting, was she found a speech pattern that Ruth has. And when you listen to it, it's a little bit of a stutter. It's a perfect Long Island accent. She kind of coughs her words a little bit. And when I didn't quite grasp it, I was like, is there anything wrong with Blythe? But then I looked at some Ruth interviews. I said, no, she's doing Ruth's voice, and she's getting Ruth's accent, and that's very much who Blythe is as an actress. She wants to find that kind of particular that accent. But that was really the extent of it. We were not dealing with anything nearly as heavy as you were. It was really up to Richard to finally decide, and he and I said, let's you give Bernie his personality. We understood his personality, like I said, from the tapes of his phone calls, and we got that.
I want to turn the discussion to rehearsal in the prep process, and we'll move this along. Here's where we want to do something a little different than what we've done in the past. We'd like to show you a short clip. This only goes for a couple of 3 minutes, but I think you'll find it fascinating, and I think for all of us, and I think it will amplify what Alex brings to the party when he brings his enormous talent to these two live musicals. So we're going to pop down in our chair, watch it with you, and then we'll hop right back up here and continue the discussion after you see this. Well, I think you can see that, and you use the term choreography, Alex, which I think that it's no stretch to say that the incredible choreography of just the camera and the physical production is it a stretch to say that is that kind of a part of what you do? Because
absolutely, 100%.
I think you can see it's just amazing.
The logistical exercise of I mean, that's kind of what I bring to the table as a live broadcast director is figuring out how to achieve and to execute in real time. And most people don't understand what goes on behind camera, which is great to be able to show a clip like that. But the planning, once you lock in the rough locations for your cast and figure out how best to tell that story, as we all do, how best to tell that story visually, then it's the huge headache of trying to figure out, but I've got to be out on a street, and then the next scene calls for it to be in a TV studio, but I have the same lead cast members, or the same lead cast member needs to be there 42 seconds later. So, from the get-go for 9 months, I'm working with an amazing DGA stage management team and amazing ADs, trying to figure out and putting stopwatches on golf carts, and it's absolutely to the second. I mean, Tracy Turnblad left that scene, jumped on a golf cart, drove quarter of a kilometer to a soundstage, got into soundstage, literally had hair and makeup people on the golf cart patting her down, and stepped in her character with 8 seconds to spare. And that's the first five and a half minutes of the 3-hour show. Well, it's extraordinary, and so when you talk about the rest of us are often pleading for a couple of days of rehearsal. This is 3 months of rehearsal, and it is intense. And you can imagine if you didn't have that kind of intense rehearsal, it's all or nothing once you hit the air, right? It's all or nothing. The way that these things work is, and I was talking to the gentleman I decided to me just before we came in, we do have a little bit of a safety blanket in terms of we record in front of an audience on location the night before, and we record to tape. So that's my very small safety blanket, and we play that in sync. I resync at the beginning of every scene So should anything disastrous happen, and actually in Greece we lost the sound truck for 13 seconds, and I had to go to the backup recording for 13 seconds. But yes, I'm making those decisions all the time, and so not only am I trying to run as seamlessly as possible the logistical exercise, I'm trying to look ahead and address the faults and address the issues, and hopefully, the weather issues that you're keeping your fingers crossed, because for Hairspray 40% of it was outside. You're praying that you're not in a drenched situation as well.
Well,
can I just say I'm aghast at what I've just heard. I had no idea I had it so easy.
Right.
I had no idea. I mean, it is shocking everything you've just said. I'm filled with admiration and terror.
Yeah.
Terror is most of my life.
Just the picture cars, how unlikely it is for them to work take after take is like.
Yeah.
Plus they're period
I
cars,
worked with
so
those cars; they almost never work.
Absolutely, the picture cars, and Gary Hood, my lead stage manager, will tell you 1,000 stories about the picture cars not working from that period, and us having to jump start them half the time, or just queuing them up because some of them had to do a loop around the back lot. So we had a minute and a half for them to clear shots and then go around the back and be queued up. There's a whole line of picture cars waiting to come through, and they have to arrive, as you all know from a logistical standpoint as directors. You're trying to cue them perfectly into the shot framing, into that composition at a given point, and so to hit that absolutely spot on within that frame is very tough, especially when so many things in the card pack can throw you off counter. Right. It just takes one little thing, and suddenly the snowball effect is pretty huge. But you again, kudos to everyone on the DGA team that I'm lucky enough to surround myself with. You try, as with all of us, we try and surround ourselves with the best possible talent. Yeah. And a huge dose of luck, and hopefully you pull it off. And I think the audience, hey, listen, one of the reasons people watch these events is because they want it to be live. They want to feel there's a bit of jeopardy there. So people are a little bit forgiving if a few things go wrong, or the rat breaks down halfway through the scene.
Well, extraordinary work, and I want to. Time flies. I did want to talk a little bit about the actual shooting of the film, the production period, and I'd like to start with Steve, because one of the things I was struck by as a director was the pacing of your film, and I mean it in this way. It was very deliberate, and I find that most directors are that's a risk. At a time when we're all asked to move things along and keep it keep it moving, blah blah. You didn't seem to feel a pressure to do that, and because you didn't, the tension and the anxiety that you were able to achieve as we experienced this story was remarkable. Did you ever feel any pressure to move it along, or did that always seem right to you?
Again, it sort of happened naturally. I mean, the idea of the first episode is one night, is the night of the crime, and so it already has a kind of a real time idea to it. We're not covering 3 months in a guy's life. It's it starts at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it ends at 3 a.m. or something like that. So I mean, I knew that it would have that sort of feeling, the feeling of semi-real time. And then when we were shooting, I love process, and I'm fascinated by things I don't know anything about. I don't know anything about the police. I don't know anything about,
really?
I didn't know anything about the police until I did it. So just how the police show up and how they go up the stairs and how they announce all of those things. I don't watch the other shows like, CSI and stuff. So I really learned all of that.
Did you have a technical advisor?
Yes, we always had. In fact, one of the cop who's smoking on the job, he's an actual cop. But we always had a few, and they were also important in the writing, and I always just wanted them there when we were shooting, just in case I had a question. And so all of these things, and the idea that if you're the person who's in trouble, I think time starts, you're aware of every single minute. You're aware of every car that comes by, every new person that shows up. And when you're waiting, there's a lot of waiting in the criminal justice system. There's tons of waiting, for when you're arrested, when you sit in a cell, when you're waiting for the guy to come interview. And I found that there was some drama in the waiting. And the only pressure that I got was early on, when I first did the pilot, some people thought there should be music in it. And
well, I wanted to ask you about that because there virtually isn't.
There's virtually none.
There's a little bit of sound design.
There was a little sound design in that last clip, and frankly, I don't even need it. But the big scene was from the time that he's discovers the body until he's arrested. That's kind of the typical place where you have music. And the fact that, and I found actually we even had music there up until the mix, and it was during the mix that once we had all the other sound there, and that I just said let's just take it all out.
So you basically you had a score that you basically dumped in post.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I remember that
how did that go over?
It went over great because it was obvious. And Michael Berry, the mixer, said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "No, I'm not sure, but
You're
there's
never
no
sure.
harm in just doing it and seeing how it looks."
Love hearing
you
that.
know,
That's a great story.
and
Well, also, I want to ask you, because time flies, I want to ask you the extraordinary sense of composition, too, that you brought to it. We saw in the opening clip that marvelous piece of staging where he's being searched for the knife, and the knife comes up just as it's, he's being implicated seriously. Is that the kind of thing that you discovered in the moment, or did you plan for that? Did you work with the operator or DP on that, or how did that happen?
This was the only sequence, I'll call it a sequence, it's kind of more than a scene, the only sequence that was rehearsed, that we had a rehearsal, where we actually had the actors come in, and it wasn't so much to rehearse the camera, it was to rehearse the dialogue, because the dialogue is overlapping,
right?
And so it's one thing to read it on the page or write it and read it. It's another thing, well, can it really work with all these people having separate conversations at the same time? And so we rehearsed that just for, a few hours in pre-production. And then when we shot, it was, Robert Ellsworth shot that, and Andy Rollins was the camera operator, and then Robert actually shot the handheld stuff, which was all the stuff with the searching. So we were shooting 2 cameras a lot on that, and it was the most elaborate sequence in the show in terms of the number of setups. I mean, we had I lost track. I think we made it to Z. We had a lot. And I think we shot for 2 days.
It's extraordinary.
It was a big deal.
It's extraordinary.
It took a while to do it.
Now, conversely, Raymond, you had a picture. You had a different story, different sensibility. Your pacing was extremely brisk throughout, I thought. Really moved. You had several montages that moved right along, very much underscored, unlike the night of. But they brought remarkable clarity, I thought, to a subject that that could get either so musty or so complex that you no longer cared. You really kept it moving, and you used music to great effect. Did you storyboard these montages that you used? Did you think about it?
I don't really. I've never storyboarded anything. I don't shot list. I don't do any of that. What I wanted to do. Two things happened. When ABC hired me, they were very honest about saying, we're hiring you because we're not looking for you to make something that necessarily looks like what we do. That's why we're hiring a feature director. So we want you to approach it as a movie, and how do you want to do it? On the other hand, they also said, but watch what the pacing is of our shows, because we do want it to have that drive. And it was great for me, because one thing I've always heard about my movies is it starts slow, but you should hang in. And I always think, I don't think it starts slow, but that's in my mind that's how I do it. So I thought, well, let's use this as a little bit of an education, and let me embrace that rather than fight it. But the other thing I thought about a lot was I love 1930s Warner Brothers crime movies. they just move like hell. They're just these, and I'm talking about like Public Enemy and Bombshell, and I mean these kind of great like driving 30s movies, which are filled with montages and tremendous force. And I thought, well, we have that opportunity in a sense with this movie, even though nobody's ever even seen 30s Warner Brothers movies, is going to watch this. You can still use that technique. You can really kind of hammer something hard. You have a big scope and a big true crime and big city movie, to tell. And I thought, well, why don't we kind of embrace that, because I am an old movie geek, and then also kind of please ABC along the way. We also had, we had a very, very definite, the scripts were about 60 pages for each hour, but the running times were supposed to be 45 minutes. When we timed the scripts, they really came out to like somewhere in the early 50s. But again, I took it all as a challenge, and I thought, well, we can't really cut this right now. We have to get shooting. So I shot at a certain pace, and I said to my editor, who I'd worked with for a long time, David Leonard, let's really surprise these guys. Let's really turn in like 43-minute cuts. Let's do it. Let's really like amp it up. And we did, and ABC was very pleased, and they were a little puzzled. They were like, "Well, where's all the fat that you cut out? Like, did you cut any good stuff?" We were like, "No, this is what we want to do here in your 5-act, 45-minute piece." So it's the opposite in many ways, but it was also a challenge and it was a good learning experience.
Jay, also on your part, as always, consummate staging. You are a master in my view, of blending comedic elements with serious thematic drama. Got to ask you about, as we kind of get close to allowing you to ask a couple of questions you may have, I got to ask you about the scene on the toilet. I got to ask you about the toilet. For those of you who haven't seen All the Way, Lyndon Johnson is desperately trying to figure out how to get a bill out of committee, has Hubert Humphrey in the Oval Office follow him to the presidential toilet. And while he takes a shit, he insists that Hubert stand there and work this problem out with him. Mm-hmm. At the end of the scene, he comes up with a solution, wipes his behind, by the way, in the scene, stands up, washes his hands, walks happily back, having solved the problem, to the Oval Office, and with the towel he's used to wash his hands, jams it into Hubert Humphrey's arms. I almost fell off the chair. I thought it was wonderful. Now, the question was that devised in the moment? Was it written in?
No, it was one of his famous ways of putting people he wanted to persuade to do something off balance. And much like he did with the car, that we didn't make that up. He would drive crazy speeds, drinking, bourbon through the country roads, and then suddenly pretend his brakes failed and then go off into the water. And then after he realized you'd practically soiled yourself, as you were, he would begin a negotiation. So that, and the toilet thing was something he actually did with people.
That's
so
recorded
it was
history.
Part of the lore of LBJ. It was in the play, but it wasn't. I knew I had to sort of stage it, and there are so many times when I do these political films where I'm kind of thinking, oh, they're in their minds thinking, why did we get the Austin Powers guy for this? And in that scene, they didn't have to explain that, because I have great experience, years of experience doing bodily function humor, and I'm very good at that.
And none of us are too proud to say that we haven't. Well, listen, thank you all very much for attending tonight. I especially want to thank these 4 amazing, talented directors for sharing an evening with us. Extraordinary work, everyone. One of the best years ever, a great roster of films. We'll adjourn to the atrium. There'll be more opportunity for you to perhaps collar one of these guys, and thank you again. Good evening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.